The Strange Cousin.
The famous five. Five on a treasure island. So last week we read the first chapter called The Great Surprise, and we basically just met the family. So let's read the new chapter called The Strange Cousin and see if it's a little bit more exciting.
The children's aunt had been watching for the car. She came running out of the old wooden door as soon as she saw it draw up outside. The children liked the look of her at once. "Welcome to Kirin," she cried. "Hello, all of you. It's lovely to see you. And what big children." There were kisses all round.
I actually thought this was a South African tradition. When your family comes around that you haven't seen in a while and then everybody wants to be kissed. I remember as a child we dreaded that, all the uncles and aunts wanting to kiss you. Is it all over the world? Is it everywhere the same?
And then the children went into the house. They liked it. It felt old and rather mysterious somehow, and the furniture was old and very beautiful. "Where's Georgina?" asked Anne, looking round for her unknown cousin. "Oh, the naughty girl. I told her to wait in the garden for you," said her aunt. "Now she's gone off somewhere. I must tell you, children, you may find George a bit difficult at first. She's always been one on her own, you know, and at first may not like you being here. But you mustn't take any notice of that. She'll be all right in a short time. I was very glad for Georgie's sake that you were able to come. She badly needs other children to play with." "Do you call her George?" asked Anne in surprise. "I thought her name was Georgina." "So it is," said her aunt, "but George hates being a girl, and we have to call her George as if she was a boy. The naughty girl won't answer if we call her Georgina." The children thought Gina sounded rather exciting. They wished she would come, but she didn't. Their Uncle Quentin suddenly appeared instead. He was a most extraordinary-looking man, very tall, very dark, and with a rather fierce frown on his wide forehead. "Hello, Quentin," said Daddy. "It's a long time since I've seen you. I hope these three won't disturb you very much in your work." "Quentin is working on a very difficult book," said Aunt Fanny. "But I've given him a room all to himself on the other side of the house, so I don't expect he will be disturbed." Their uncle looked at the three children and nodded to them. The frown didn't come off his face, and they all felt a little scared and were glad that he was to work in another part of the house. "Where's George?" he said in a deep voice. "Gone off somewhere again," said Aunt Fanny, vexed. "I told her she was to stay here and meet her cousins." "She wants a good talking to," said Uncle Quentin. The children couldn't quite make out whether he was joking or not. "Well, children, I hope you have a good time here, and maybe you will knock a little common sense into George."
I'm unfamiliar with the word vexed, so I thought maybe some of you don't know what it means. So I checked it out, and it means feeling or showing irritation, annoyance, or distress.
There was no room at Kirin Cottage for Mother and Daddy to stay the night, so after a hurried supper, they left to stay at a hotel in the nearest town. They would drive back to London immediately after breakfast the next day, so they said goodbye to the children that night. Georgina still hadn't appeared. "I'm sorry we haven't seen Georgina," said Mother. "Just give her our love and tell her we hope she'll enjoy playing with Dick, Julian and Anne." Then Mother and Daddy went. The children felt a little bit lonely as they saw the big car disappear around the corner of the road, but Aunt Fanny took them upstairs to show them their bedrooms, and they soon forgot to be sad. The two boys were to sleep together in a room with slanting ceilings at the top of the house. It had a marvelous view of the bay. The boys were really delighted with it. Anne was to sleep with Georgina in a smaller room whose windows looked over the moors at the back of the house, but one side window looked over the sea, which pleased Anne very much. It was a nice room, and red roses nodded their heads in at the window. "I do wish Georgina would come," Anne said to her aunt. "I want to see what she's like." "Well, she's a funny little girl," said her aunt. "She can be very rude and haughty, but she's kind at heart, very loyal and absolutely truthful. Once she makes friends with you, she will always be your friend, but she finds it very difficult indeed to make friends, which is great pity."
Do you struggle to make friends? Is it hard for you? Some people find it really, really hard. Even myself. I struggle to make friends sometimes. So I thought of 5 tips that I can give you to make good friends. The first one that I thought of was to start the conversation. I know this takes a lot of courage, but just go up to someone and talk about something that you both have in common. Like the weather, for instance. That's why they always joke about that. Just start by saying, hey, do you like this weather? Do you prefer cold weather? What's your favorite season? And there's so much that can just go out of there. Another way to start a conversation is with a compliment. So just don't lie. If you see someone that's wearing nice shoes or something, then just say, listen, I like those shoes. Where did you get it? Kind of thing. And then maybe you can continue the conversation like, what's your shoe size? Oh, I wear this, and blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. Second tip I have is be observant and helpful. So just watch it a little bit, check things out a little bit. Just don't be a stalker, but just check it out a bit and see how they respond. What do they do? What do they eat for lunch at school now? I'm specifically thinking. Who do they talk to? What are their interests, And then maybe you can find some way that you can be helpful and add value, Or that would lead to my next point. If you observe, you will be able to see something that you could perhaps comment on or compliment them on and show interest in. So ask them more about it if you see something that you could maybe have a conversation about. So that was the third tip. And then the fourth tip would be, in order to have a good friend, you have to be a good friend. So be there for someone, smile, be friendly, be kind, And then lastly, that kind of connects to that, is be trustworthy. Don't gossip. If someone tells you something, then don't spread it around and keep it to yourself and show people that you can trust them. So those are my 5 tips for making good friends.
Anne suddenly yawned. The boys frowned at her because they knew what would happen next, and it did. Poor Anne, how tired you are. You must all go to bed straight away and have a good night. Then you will wake up quite fresh tomorrow, said Aunt Fanny. Anne, you are an idiot, said Dick crossly when his aunt had gone out of the room. You know quite well what grown-ups think as soon as we yawn. I just want to go down at the beach for a while. I'm so sorry, said Anne. Somehow I couldn't help it. And anyway, you're yawning now, Dick. And Julian too. So they were. They were as sleepy as could be with their long drive. Secretly, all of them longed to cuddle down into bed and shut their eyes. I wonder where Georgina is, said Anne, when she said goodnight to the boys and went to her own room. Isn't she odd? Not waiting to welcome us, and not coming in to supper, and not even in yet. She's sleeping in my room. Goodness knows what time she'll be in. All the 3 children were fast asleep before Georgina came up to bed. They didn't hear her open Anne's door. They didn't hear her get undressed and clean her teeth. They didn't hear the creak of her bed as she got into it. They were so tired that they heard nothing at all until the sun awoke them in the morning. When Anne awoke, she couldn't at first think where she was. She lay in a little bed and looked up at the slanting ceiling and at the red roses that nodded at the open window, and suddenly remembered all in a rush where she was. I'm at Kieran Bay, and it's the holidays, she said to herself, and screwed up her legs with joy. Then she looked across at the other bed. In it lay the figure of another child, curled up under the bedclothes. Anne could see the top of a curly head, and that was all. When the figure stirred a little, Anne spoke. I say, are you Georgina? The child in the opposite bed sat up and looked across at Anne. She had very short curly hair, almost as short as a boy's. Her face was burnt, dark brown with the sun, and her very blue eyes looked as bright as forget-me-nots in her face. But her mouth was rather sulky, and she had a frown like her father's. No, she said, I'm not Georgina. Oh, said Anne in surprise. Then who are you? I'm George, said the girl. I shall only answer if you call me George. I hate being a girl. I won't be. I don't like doing the things that girls do. I like doing the things that boys do. I can climb better than any boy and swim faster too. I can sail a boat as well as any fisher boy on this coast. You're to call me George. Then I'll speak to you. But I shan't if you don't. Oh, said Anne, thinking that her new cousin was most extraordinary. All right. I don't care what I call you. George is a nice name, I think. I don't much like Georgina anyway. You look like a boy. Do I really? Said George, the frown leaving her face for a moment. Mother was awfully cross with me when I cut my hair short. I had hair all around my neck. It was awful. The two girls stared at one another for a moment. Don't you simply hate being a girl? Asked George. No, of course not, said Anne. You see, I do like pretty frocks, and I love my dolls, and you can't do that if you're a boy. Pooh! Fancy bothering about pretty frocks, said George in a scornful voice, and dolls. Well, you are a baby, that's all I can say. Anne felt offended. You're not very polite, she said. You won't find that my brothers take much notice of you if you act as if you know everything. They're real boys, not pretend boys like you. Going to be nasty to me, I shan't take any notice of them, said George, jumping out of bed. I didn't want any of you to come anyway, interfering with my life here. I'm quite happy on my own. Now I've got to put up with a silly girl who likes frocks and dolls and two stupid boy cousins. Anne felt that they had made a very bad beginning. She said no more, but got dressed herself too. She put on her grey jeans and a red jersey. George put on jeans too and a boy's jersey. They were ready. The boys hammered on their door. Aren't you ready? Is Georgina there? Cousin Georgina, come on. George flung open the door and marched out with her head high. She took no notice of the two surprised boys at all. She stalked downstairs. The other three children looked at one another. She won't answer if you call her Georgina, explained Anne. She's awfully funny, I think. She says she didn't want us to come because we'll interfere with her. She laughed at me and was rather rude. Julian put his arm around Anne and looked doleful. Cheer up, he said. You've got us to stick up for you. Come on down to breakfast. They were all hungry. The smell of bacon and eggs was very good. They ran down the stairs and said good morning to their aunt. She was just bringing the breakfast to the table. Their uncle was sitting at the head reading his paper. He nodded at the children. They sat down without a word, wondering if they were allowed to speak at meals. They always were at home, but their Uncle Quentin looked rather fierce. George was there, buttering a piece of toast. She scowled at the little children. Don't look like that, George, said her mother. I hope you've made friends already. It will be fun for you to play together. You must take your cousins to see the bay this morning and show them the best places to bathe. I'm going fishing, said George. Her father looked up at once. You are not, he said. You're going to show a few good manners for a change and take your cousins to the bay. Do you hear me? Yes, said George, with a scowl exactly like her father. Oh, we can go to the bay ourselves, all right, if George is going fishing, said Anne, at once thinking that it would be nice not to have George if she was in a bad temper. George will do exactly as she's told, said her father. If she doesn't, I shall deal with her. So, after breakfast, 4 children got ready to go down to the beach. An easy path led them down the bay, and they ran down happily. Even George lost a frown as she felt the warmth of the sun and saw the dancing sparkles on the blue sea. You go fishing if you want to, said Anne when they were down at the beach. We won't tell tales on you. We don't want to interfere with you, you know. We've got ourselves for company, and if you don't want to be with us, you needn't. But we'd like you all the same, if you'd like to be with us, said Julian generously. He thought George was rather rude and ill-mannered, but he couldn't help rather liking the look of her straight-backed, short-haired little girl with her brilliant blue eyes and sulky mouth. George stared at him. I'll see, she said. I don't make friends with people just because they're my cousins or something silly like that. I only make friends with people if I like them. So do we, said Julian. We may not like you, of course. Oh, said George, as if that thought hadn't occurred to her. Well, you may not, of course. Lots of people don't like me, now I come to think of it. Anne was staring out over the blue bay. At the entrance to it lay a curious rocky island with what looked like an old ruined castle on the top of it. Isn't that a funny place, she said. I wonder what it's called. It's called Kieran Island, said George, her eyes as blue as the sea as she turned to look at it. It's a lovely place to go. If I like you, I may take you there someday. But I don't promise. The only way to get there is by boat. Who does the funny island belong to? Asked Julian. George made a most surprising answer. It belongs to me, she said. At least, it will belong to me someday. It will be my very own island and my very own castle.
So what did you think? I quite enjoyed this. Georgina sounds weird. I wonder if she's making up stories about this castle or what she meant. But we will find out next week in A Peculiar Story and a New Friend. See you in Chapter 3.